Amongst the chaos and barbarism in Tarkov, certain groups of individuals are quick to capitalize upon the death and destruction around them. And while their motives range from altruism to greed and personal gain, one thing they all share in common is that they maintain a stable connection to the outside world and that they are able to source food, water, weapons, and supplies for anyone who can pay, and sometimes in exchange for getting their hands dirty. These are the stories of the shady men and women who keep Tarkov's machine of death well oiled with the blood of both innocents and the guilty. These are the dealers of Tarkov. Warrant Officer Pavel Yegorovich Romanenko, or Prapor as you may know him, is in charge of a vast network of military supply warehouses within the Norinsk region. During the Cold War with the United States, the former Soviet Union amassed what equates to nearly an infinite supply of weapons, equipment, ammunition, and vehicles. When the Soviet Union fell apart in the early 90s, much of this equipment was mothballed and sent into long-term storage within warehouses just like the ones that Prapor manages. With post-Soviet military leadership being easy to bribe and manipulate, large quantities of cosmoline-soaked weapons have a way of misplacing their inventory lists. When the violence in Tarkov began to escalate, Prapor saw an opportunity to enter the arms trade and make a hefty profit for himself. Initially, during the contract wars days, he supplied bare operatives only, but as time went on and the situation within Tarkov began to grow more and more complex, Prapor found a way that he could make twice as much profit by playing both sides, and so he started to serve the stranded USEC operators as well. When you first meet Prapor, he is hesitant, brief, and untrusting of you. Prapor has seen many faces come and go within Tarkov, and even the most promising fighters have a way of succumbing to the local bands of scavs and raiders. But he is willing to give you a chance, and sends you off to eliminate 5 scavs around the customs area and bring back 2 of their shotguns as proof of your work. If successful, Prapor sends you on more errands to prove yourself. Typically, this involves eliminating groups of scavs in various areas, or picking up and dropping off items, such as a bronze pocket watch he wishes to give back to the son of a fallen friend. With each successful mission, he places more and more trust in you, and begins to call you pet names such as Warrior, Rambo, and the Terror of Tarkov. It isn't long until he gives you some jobs of greater significance that may shed clues of the history of Tarkov. Prapor learns of an underground network under the reserve base that was recently accessed by a group of raiders. While he never confirms them by name, this may have been Glukar and his henchmen. Apparently, the raiders forced local scavs to excavate a pathway to this underground area, and then summarily executed the lot of them. Either way, Prapor's groups of scavs wouldn't go near the place, and it's up to you to find out what's down there and why the raiders want it so bad. Once visiting the underground bunkers, you relay to Prapor that this is an old Soviet-era command bunker that is able to be hermetically sealed in the event of a nuclear war. Not only that, but this tunnel system connects nearly all of the areas of the reserve base, and those in control of it can easily defend the entire reserve area. During his briefings with you, he also says something very curious. Merc, you're just in time. You are exactly who I need. Do you remember that fucking command bunker you found in the reserve base? Long story short, my guys went there, and it turned out to be a nasty place. Built with a high level of protection, filters, generators. All approaches are blocked by extremely strong hermetic locks. Just an underground fortress. But the raiders opened the fucking thing and dug in like Alabama ticks. Now, why would a Russian supply warrant officer be using euphemisms such as dug in like an Alabama tick? This is certainly a southern United States saying. Perhaps Prapor has been in the company of some Westerners for a little too long. As your relationship with Prapor deepens, you start to learn that he has quite the involvement with the local scavs. Not one to let any opportunity go to waste, he will accept payment from you to retrieve your lost gear in the event you are robbed or incapacitated. He calls it insurance. But some have rumored that Prapor forces these same scavs that go collect your stuff to ambush you, to keep you using his services. In addition to this, he also uses scavs as messengers to communicate with other dealers around the Tarkov region, mainly one who goes by the name of Therapist. As your reputation with Prapor grows, he begins to send you on a series of tasks that involve killing large amounts of scavs in very specific ways. Initially, this didn't sound too out of the ordinary as a way of ridding the area of criminal gangs, but as it goes on, it turns out that Prapor has been acting as an intermediary for a mysterious third party. Eventually, you learn that these killings were part of a morbid blood sport, where this clandestine group would bet wagers on how many kills you'd get. Eventually, they begin to refer to themselves as the Masters, and reveal that they intend to create a large-scale gladiatorial sport within Tarkov, using you as a proof of concept. Prapor reveals to you that he is becoming uncomfortable with the relationship he has built with these so-called masters, and that they are becoming concerned about PMCs in the area closing in on them. They direct Prapor to instruct you to start killing PMCs, even your own kind. Eventually, Prapor can't take it anymore, and he cuts off ties with the masters, and rewards you with a valuable secure container for your efforts. Who these people are, and what their true motives are, is unknown, but one suspicious clue may be hidden in the rewards that Prapor passes along to you. Prapor only has access to Soviet and post-Soviet era weapons, armor, and ammunition, but during this time, he rewards you with a fully kitted M4A1 in a SOP mod configuration. Whoever is behind this mysterious blood sport has Western connections, and maybe some of the same ones who had some of their speech mannerisms rub off on Prapor. Prapor seems to recover from his aversion to sending you to do his dirty work, and shifts his focus away from the local scavs to taking out large amounts of PMCs in a variety of ways. It's clear that he's testing you, sizing you up, and preparing himself to make a final determination on whether or not he can trust you before letting you in on the real secrets. Finally, he asks you to reach the absolute highest level of trust with almost all the known dealers in the area before approaching you with a major proposition. Something too important for his normal run-of-the-mill scav messenger. The dealer known as Skier has been working endlessly towards revealing whatever this mysterious blue ice substance is that can be found all over Tarkov. It's everywhere in the chemical factory area and can be found in massive quantities in the customs area, apparently being prepped for shipment before the place had to be abandoned. Skier isn't trying to find out what this stuff is out of the goodness of his heart, of course. It's purely because he knows it can be valuable, and he wishes to line his pockets with the rubles, dollars, euros, yen, or even gold doubloons for all he cares. Prapor is quick to make a move, and requests that you put a tracking beacon on an operational van in the area that contains a shipment of blue ice for an unknown buyer. Prapor knows this buyer, and just like Skier, he doesn't care what their intentions are with the stuff. He just wants a payout. In the future, Prapor may have more to ask of you, but until then, you'd be better off by continuing to make your alliances with other dealers in the region stronger. Once you've proven yourself to Prapor, you'll be a reliable source of comm block weapons and equipment, which will definitely prove useful in Tarkov, given how much ammo is lying around for these types of weapons. Perhaps in the future we'll have more details of Prapor's past, and potentially his future. Elvira Kababalina, or better known under her alias, Therapist, was the head of the trauma care department of Tarkov City Central Hospital before the region was blockaded and violence erupted. Of all departments within a hospital, trauma is one of the most stressful to manage. As its name implies, trauma medicine refers to the treatment of traumatic injuries as a result of automobile accidents, gunshot wounds, broken bones, or severed limbs. Unlike many dealers within Tarkov, Elvira witnessed countless bloodied and crushed bodies before a single shot had ever been fired by USEC or Bear forces. It is assumed that the therapist became trapped within Tarkov when she either missed her chance to evacuate or willingly stayed behind to help the injured and dying within Tarkov. Keeping true to her Hippocratic vows, Therapist appears to only desire to aid the citizens of Tarkov, using you as her intermediary. But as her story unfolds, she may not be the compassionate healer you think she is. When you first meet Elvira, just like Prapor, she begins to size you up almost immediately. When you first meet any of the dealers, the violence in Tarkov has been going on for quite some time, and there's no question that they've all seen many mercenaries come and go. To test your loyalty and aptitude, she requires that you retrieve 3 Salewa medical kits for her, but on one condition: they must be found while in combat. You can only assume one thing from this requirement: the therapist means business. If you prove useful, you must be willing and able to put up a fight for whatever it is she has in store for you. If you successfully bring what she wants, she immediately informs you that the local aquifer has been purposely polluted, and that a large gang of scavs near the dorms area and customs has been seen carrying in large quantities of clean drinking water to hoard for themselves. Interestingly enough, Therapist already knows who's behind this pollution, and she has a team of engineers already at work to fix the problem. But clean water is needed in the meantime. If you manage to find this stockpile of water, she notes that the dealer known as Skier might be upset about your discovery. Not wasting any time, she informs you that she knows exactly who has polluted the water supply, and that the group of scavs responsible need to be dealt with, saying this.
I'm not really comfortable with this kind of request, but there are lives at stake, and these scoundrels go on with their dirty business. We need to properly scare them off, let them die in suffering so they would feel what they've done and what they're being punished for. Will you do it?
You are momentarily taken aback by her words. Up until this point, Therapist has presented herself as a medical professional aiming only to aid the people of the region, but now she requests not only do you kill this gang of scavs, but that you do so in a fashion that they are made to suffer. But these are dark times, and you shrug off her comments and do her bidding. When you return to Therapist, she is in alarm over a newly discovered issue at the old chemical production factory. She informs you that whatever chemical was being produced by Terra Group there is leaking into the groundwater, and that if it is not rectified, it could kill everyone within Tarkov. She needs you to find a collection of gas analyzers in order to fix the problem, but is very stern with you that questions of what this chemical is or what it is used for is strictly none of your business. You aren't sure what the long-term implications are of these requests, but she promises you much needed medical supplies and rubles in return, so it's hard to say no. With questions still unanswered about the chemical plant, you keep returning to Therapist and slowly start to build her trust. She often requires you to find medical items for her or sends you on courier missions in notoriously hostile areas. Each time you return successful, she rewards you handsomely. And each time you return bloody and battered, she fixes you up for a small fee. As your relationship with her grows, she offers you better and more rare medical equipment and occasionally high-end storage devices. On one such visit to pick up a few extra IFACs for a trip to customs area, she approaches you with an excited alarm in her eyes. Therapist has negotiated the evacuation of civilians out of the Tarkov region with the Russian Federation troops guarding the border. She has gathered enough food, water, and medical supplies for them to make the journey, but the vans are not operational and require spark plugs and batteries to get running. If you manage to find these for her, these desperate citizens can finally make it out of this hellscape and return to safety. She notes, however, that only women, children, and the very elderly will be evacuated in this first wave. No military-aged males are allowed to leave. You feel a small tinge of regret for the nameless, faceless young accountants, lawyers, or bookkeepers that will now be doomed to stay within Tarkov. The ones who don't possess a fighting bone in their body, but will be forced to become as beasts and assimilate into a life of chaos and gunsmoke or be swallowed by it. You spend many days and nights searching for what she needs, but eventually you find the required parts and you stand with her outside her makeshift clinic and watch the taillights fade into the night as the evacuees make their way towards the Tarkov border. 15 minutes later, a chill shoots down your spine as you hear faint gunshots in the direction they were headed, then complete silence. By this point, you have earned trust with Therapist, and she has transitioned from calling you mercenary to young man. At times you're annoyed by this and sometimes feel belittled, but over time, it grows on you. Therapist continues to send you to various areas of Tarkov, fulfilling courier missions for her as she seems to have some interest in figuring out what Terra Group was up to while they were active in the region. Then, one day she approaches you with a special mission to find out what happened near Shoreline. An underground tunnel that evacuees were using to flee the region collapsed, and casualties were massive. Ambulances were dispatched to aid the injured, and then ambushed by bandits. The paramedics tried to flee, but most were gunned down. Therapist is hopeful that valuable medical supplies are still inside those ambulances, and sends you out to locate them. You find the ambulances, and miraculously, the supplies are still inside. And while searching them for meds, you find a luxury Mercedes SUV in the area with several deceased individuals inside, all with high-level Terra Group credentials. You relay this information to Therapist on your return, and she informs you that she is aware that Terra Group conducted very serious medical research that may have been left behind in the health resort with Terra Group employees she has had previous dealings with. If you can find it, it may be valuable enough to earn both you and her a ticket out of Tarkov. You waste no time and head straight towards the resort. Upon arriving, you unlock room 306 in the west wing, and as you open the door, the stench of decay and rot slaps you in the face. In the room are 2 corpses in an advanced stage of decomposition. Wrapping a shemagh around your face, you search the room with watering eyes and find a documents case with what you assume contains whatever Therapist wanted. You glance at its contents, but it might as well be written in another language. Nothing but medical jargon and gibberish. There's no time for sentiments or any kind of burial for these two. You don't even close the door when you leave. Returning to therapist, you give her the documents and her eyes widen. The Terra Group documents you found were all related to research in the field of immunology. Whatever this research had to do with, you are certain that had some involvement in why this whole godforsaken mess is the way that it is. Therapist tells you that she knows an elderly practitioner in this field, and that he drove a white minivan around the woods area. He had great success with his research, and may have possibly tested some of these Terra Group concoctions on himself. You head off, and after days searching, you finally find an abandoned, ransacked van by the water's edge. Nobody in sight, but a splash of blood covering the sliding door. Remembering therapist's words, that this doctor may have experimented on himself, you collect a sample of blood and return it to therapist, who sends it off for analysis. Days go by, and you become preoccupied with tasks from other dealers in the area when you decide to go back and check on therapist and see if she has anything new to offer. When you return, you notice she seems off. She seems a little more rigid than normal and slightly short with you. While trying to make conversation, you can tell she's examining you. Then finally she mentions the blood sample, saying only that she hopes you had no open wounds when you collected it, and that you didn't handle it with bare hands. In alarm, you open your mouth to object or ask questions, but she immediately dismisses what she said, saying that exposure to sun, wind, and rain most likely rendered the blood safe. But as you leave, she tells you to keep a very close eye on how you're feeling, and to let her know if there's any changes with your health. Sleep does not come easily to you that night. In subsequent visits, therapist checks on your health before finally dropping the subject after some time. She sends you on a few odd jobs, mostly collecting food or other supplies for those in need. Once in a while, she sends you out to clear scavs out of areas, but again, that uncharacteristic ferocity sometimes laces her instructions when she tells you to kill them at very close range and to inflict massive suffering. It's clear that therapist almost doesn't view the local scavs as actual humans, but almost like cattle that needs to be culled. Either way, you don't ask questions, and the pay is good. As you start to wonder if her promises about a ticket out of Tarkov was just a ruse, she informs you one day that she has learned of a doctor operating out of the shoreline location. His methods are crude, but he appears to be helping the local survivors as well as scavs, and she intends to make contact. After her team doesn't return, you go to investigate and find out they were all killed. Despite this, therapist eventually makes contact with Sanitar and begins to negotiate a deal to work together. It's at this point that you reveal to therapist that the dealer known as Jaeger has instructed you to kill Sanitar, claiming he's a fraud and a psychopath, and the reward he is offering is huge. But therapist makes an uncharacteristic shift in her demeanor. Normally, she absolutely detests the local scavs, but this one, she promises has extremely valuable knowledge, and if she can just work with him and give him access to restricted areas of the Terra Group labs, it'll be worth it. Problem is, she needs these keycards, which are beyond rare. For the first time, you betray her trust, and you kill Sanitar. But in all honesty, he forced your hand. Looking for scavs to clear out for Prapor on shoreline, Sanitar's security detail opened fire on you near the cottages. Pinned down and with nowhere to retreat to, you assaulted the cottages with a volley of hand grenades and found Sanitar's fragment-riddled corpse among the aftermath. Your story with the therapist ends on somewhat of a cliffhanger, on the cusp of a major discovery. Skier has identified what this blue ice substance is, or sometimes called the yellow chemical. They may be related, or two completely different things, but nearly every dealer within Tarkov wants the stuff. Therapist knows precisely what it is, and remarks that it is extremely dangerous, pleading with you to give her the location of the substance. In the future, the stories of therapists and other dealers of Tarkov will coalesce into a clear picture of what exactly Terra Group is up to and just how dangerous their motives and intentions are. It also seems like when Escape from Tarkov is finished, you'll have to make a decision on who you will reveal Terra Group's secrets to. Will you turn these secrets over to the authorities or relief workers for the common good of the people within Tarkov? Or will you ally yourself with Skier and other profiteers that seek to get rich from the suffering within Tarkov's borders? The choice will be yours and yours alone to make. And when those choices become apparent, I'll be here to tell the story. For weeks, you've been the personal errand boy for quite possibly the scummiest dealer in all of Tarkov. Some lowlife that calls himself Skier. In reality, he's not much of a dealer at all, but more of a peddler of various odds and ends while trying to stick his finger in every pie that he can find. But tonight, he has a special deal. Some kind of meetup or greeting. so you head over to his place and see what it's about. After awkward greetings, Skier starts to go off on some kind of tangent about how you and he are best buds and all that garbage. You roll your eyes, but it isn't long before he mentions that he thinks it's time that you meet with a real big player in the Tarkov scene. Someone with Western connections that has serious jobs that require talent and muscle. Someone like yourself, he remarks. The only catch is that Skier wants you to fork over $6,000 to foster the connection. You almost object, as that's just about all the Western money you have right now. But you take a second to think about the opportunity and eventually agree. Skier smiles and tells you that a man by the name of Peacekeeper will be contacting you shortly. Tadeusz Pilsudski is a supply officer for the United Nations Peacekeeping Force that is currently assigned to the Norvinsk region. Established in the final days of World War II, the United Nations is the successor to what is now considered to be the failed and ineffective League of Nations. The goals of the UN are broad, and in many cases they've been successful with missions to prevent war and violence, decrease infant mortality and poverty, and prevent the spread of HIV and other diseases. But one component of the UN is their peacekeeping force. While not technically considered an army, it is an armed military force that is dispatched to various areas of the globe where violence erupts or is on the cusp of doing so. The effectiveness of the blue helmets, as they are called, is a highly debated topic, as in some cases they've proven to be effective, but in other cases, having UN troops occupying your country is nearly just as bad as foreign invaders. And there's been no shortage of scandals whenever the so-called peacekeepers arrive. When open violence erupted in Tarkov, UN peacekeepers were dispatched to prevent the conflict from spreading further, but there's more going on if you read between the lines. The United Nations consists of 193 member nations, or almost every sovereign country in the world, but it's no secret that the actions of the UN are heavily influenced by Western ideals and ambitions, particularly that of the United States. And once American intelligence agencies learned that a possibly explosive situation was developing right inside of Russia's borders, it's entirely plausible that they may attempt to forge deals and alliances with anyone friendly to their cause. Enter Tadeusz Pilsudski, or as he prefers to be called, Peacekeeper. As your relationship with him grows, you'll learn just how deep his connections are, and just how low he's willing to go to pocket the spoils of war for himself. When you first meet Peacekeeper, by now you've become accustomed to the trial phase nearly every shady person in Tarkov engages in whenever they sniff out a new merc. You know they're just sizing you up and making sure that you can get the job done without mistakes, but by now you've done this so many times that it aggravates you. You wish you could just pay one of the locals to do it for you. But nevertheless, Peacekeeper wants you to drop off an SV-98 and multi-tool for one of his contacts by the beach on Shoreline, and with a chip on your shoulder, you oblige him. Surprisingly, Peacekeeper is quick to let you in on his dirty secrets as soon as you return. The Russian government has supplied the peacekeeping operation with several Tiger armored vehicles for urban patrol and reconnaissance purposes. Unfortunately, the threat of the local scavs was underestimated, and the mission was a complete failure. Now these vehicles sit abandoned, but Peacekeeper wants you to put tracking beacons on them so he can salvage them and sell any sensitive parts or electronics to American intelligence. You don't say anything, but you are momentarily taken aback by how loose-lipped Peacekeeper is with his connections to the CIA. That kind of shit will get him killed someday, you think. As soon as you return from this task, Peacekeeper immediately sends you out again on a similar mission, but this time to pinpoint the location of 3 T-90 tanks on Shoreline. This Russian armor is apparently not an export model, which means it contains all kinds of laser rangefinders and other electronics that are of interest to Peacekeeper's contacts. You complete the task for him, but you begin to wonder if these types of jobs are going to put a price on your head. But now is not the time to worry about such things, as Peacekeeper is now funneling massive amounts of much needed gear and US dollars into your stash. After a few restless nights in your hideout, you haven't heard of much work from other dealers, so you decide to visit Peacekeeper again. He seems slightly annoyed and wants you to once again patrol Shoreline. 2 UN trucks carrying humanitarian supplies and food were hit by a band of scavs, and he wants you to find them. You're confused for a moment, as not only could his own UN troops do this job, but since when did Peacekeeper care about the actual mission in Tarkov, or helping the locals? But it begins to make sense when he reveals that half of the supplies on those trucks were intended for some isolated pockets of USEC operators, paid for, of course, out of the UN budget. Worse yet, he wants you to wear a hand-me-down blue helmet uniform while you do this task, in case any prying eyes happen to snap a photo of you handling the stuff. You almost refuse, but the payout is almost $1,000, so you grab the shitty blue armor that screams, "Shoot me here for free stuff," and head out the door. You wait until nightfall to locate the trucks in an effort to lessen the obviousness of your neon blue costume. The first one was easy enough to find, but the second was near the health resort. And just as you approached, there was all kinds of commotion inside. So you planted your marker and made your way towards Xville. While passing the swamp, you break out in goosebumps, and the eerie feeling that someone is watching you nearly overwhelms your senses. As you quicken your pace, your heart skips a beat, as you could have swore that a black figure darted from behind a tree and into the inky blackness of the night. You raise your rifle and click your Surefire X400 flashlight in the direction of the motion. Who's there? Identify yourself. Nothing but gently moving leaves and bushes, pushed lightly by the night breeze. But only the chirp of crickets and the croaking of frogs answers your call. I'm losing my goddamn mind, you think to yourself, but you quicken your pace all the same. You're nearly to the other side of the swamp now and can smell the salty breeze of the ocean. Suddenly, another featureless figure darts from behind a bush to your left, and this time you are absolutely certain it wasn't your imagination. You break into a full sprint, running through bushes as their brambles and thorns cuts your exposed skin and threatens to snag on your gear. Icy sweat breaks out all over your body, and you hear an inhuman laugh directly behind you, cackling in delight from your panic. You pull the quick-release straps on your backpack and plate carrier, dropping them to the ground with a thud and enabling you to run even faster. You finally make it to the collapsed tunnel and feel a wave of relief wash over you as you spot the blue-helmeted UN troops waiting there for you, which instantly morphs back into panic as they raise their rifles at you, and the accented voices from 10 different countries bark commands at you to raise your hands in the air in 3 different languages. You gasp, "Tadosh, Peacekeeper, hold your fire," praying that the name drop will calm the poorly trained and rank amateur UN soldiers. It works, and after sharing your credentials, you make it back to Peacekeeper's office near the port without injury. At this point, you have nothing but questions for Peacekeeper, but it turns out he's already aware of who or what you encountered in the swamp. He's got a man looking into strange lights and noises coming not only from the swamp, but various locations around Tarkov, where specific rooms are adorned with various religious sigils and altars. It appears some group or cult has sprung up in Tarkov, convinced that the world unraveling around them is a sign of the end times, and that only offerings of weapons and human sacrifice will bring them salvation. But there's one problem. Peacekeeper's man has gone missing, and he needs you to complete the task of finding these locations. At first, you refuse, but days later, angrily staring at your empty M4 magazines and bullet-riddled ballistic plates, and only a half-eaten can of Tashanka left to eat, you need work. So, you agree. You determine that the risk of running into these psychos is greater than getting into a gunfight with scavs or PMCs. So you hunt for these so-called marked circles or marked rooms in the daytime. Turns out this was almost a mistake, as various operators in the area have begun to rely on the offerings of these cults and make frequent visits to these areas in the daytime. At the dorms area and customs in particular, you barely escaped with your life when you ran into 2 separate squads of USEC that were attempting to lock down the area for themselves. Before heading out to the last ritual spot on Shoreline, you had to take a trip to therapist to treat a broken leg you sustained when jumping out of a second-story window of the dormitory. With one last beacon to place, you head towards the old health resort, and you wisely decide to wait until Starfall to actually go inside that godforsaken place. During the day, this little patch of real estate is typically exploding with violence as the bears attempt to wrestle control of the place from the entrenched USEC. But at night, both sides scurry home to lick their wounds, and so you decide this is the best time to snoop around the place. While searching the east wing, with nothing but the sound of broken glass and countless shell casings under your feet, you spot a dim glow from down the dark hallway. The light flickers, and it looks like candles. This has to be the spot. You slowly make your way towards the doorway, and the sound of flies and the sickly sweet smell of putrefaction stings and assaults your senses. I fucking hate this place, you think to yourself, and consider turning 180 degrees and leaving the way you came, but you turn into the room anyways, and immediately freeze in place. Hanging from the ceiling are the decaying husks of pigs, and what you assume is a mixture of both animal and human blood covering almost every surface. Written on the floors and walls are all kinds of strange symbols and hieroglyphs, and then, in the corner, the body of a freshly deceased local with the head of a pig placed over his own in a bathtub full of blood. You activate your marker and throw it into the tub, running out of the resort and into the night, never once looking back. You wait quite some time before returning to Peacekeeper. You've told yourself that if he has you running any more jobs involving these cultists, you'll probably refuse. But this time, he has a new line of work for you. He wants to set up an operation in the health resort, manufacturing some kind of substance or chemical. Something that has to do with making the lives of the surviving civilians trapped in Tarkov easier. But he is adamant with you that you are not to tell anyone what's going on there. And to prove your loyalty, you must hand over $8,000 US. But if you comply, the future rewards will be worth it. You reluctantly agree, and then Peacekeeper gives you a shopping list of items he'll need to make this substance. Propane canisters, metal tubing, alkali surface washer, bleach and other household cleaners, injectors, and solvents. You look over the list and realize Peacekeeper is going to make narcotics. He's going to cook up drugs in the health resort with his troops and then distribute these to the locals. You begin to wonder how he learned how to make this stuff, but shrug it off and collect the required items. With Peacekeeper's drug lab now operational in the health resort, he seems to have taken an interest in all kinds of various drugs and narcotics that can be found in the Tarkov area. In one meeting, he suggested a few of the combat stimulators that are often found on the raiders in the area may have been produced by Terra Group, and that many of their effects are unknown. Tasking you to find as many of these injectors as possible, he believes that by analyzing them, he can provide conclusive proof as to whether or not Terra Group did in fact manufacture these mysterious drugs. Luckily for you, the previous day you'd been searching for some fresh water around the reserve base outskirts and managed to put a lone scav out of his misery that seemed high out of his mind, staring into the sun. In his pockets were one of these new stimulators, but also an access card to the Terra Group lab area. The place was evacuated on short notice, and you had no trouble finding a large collection of these drugs. One of your former squad mates, who has now been long deceased, once gave you a black area key card, and it's in this room where you found the majority of the injectors. You felt a certain unease while in this room. Clearly, it was some kind of medical observation room, with a large camera to observe some poor soul that was most likely trapped inside the glass cage, possibly strapped to a gurney. Who knows what kind of depraved experiments were conducted here. You check the camera for cassette tape, but the slot is empty. Returning the samples to Peacekeeper, in just a few hours he verifies that these stimulators are in fact products of the Terra Group Corporation. Not only that, but Peacekeeper sourced valuable information from the dealer known as Mechanic that the strange doctor on Shoreline, Sanitar, was in fact a Terra Group employee, saying only that he's been divorced, has medical training, and specializes in infectious diseases. He had an office in the lab, and if you can gain access and find out anything else about him, he would reward you with a large stockpile of M4s and ammunition. It takes many days and nights, but you eventually pull an unused lab's access card out of the pack of a dead raider after an intense firefight that nearly cost you your life. In addition, you had to pay a large sum of the little money you have to purchase a key card that gains access to Sanitar's office and the labs in the black market. Heading back to the lab, you locate and gain entry to Sanitar's old office, which appears to be nothing more than a glorified janitor's closet. Stuck in the side of a laptop is a flash drive which may contain what you seek, and after grabbing it, you notice the office is littered with all kinds of injectors. Bringing the drive back to Peacekeeper, he notes that the drive contains extremely valuable information, and while he can't tell you everything, he does let you in on the fact that Sanitar did in fact create many unknown drugs and even tested them on human subjects. The story of Peacekeeper is far from finished, and many secrets are yet to be discovered. While focused on enriching himself and also working with Western intelligence, is near to exposing major secrets about the Terra Group Corporation and their interests in bioengineering and human testing. Meanwhile, Peacekeeper is barely managing to keep the UN operation in Tarkov afloat, as he is constantly battling scandals and bad press, with Blue Helmet forces barely being able to contain the ongoing violence. At some point, we will learn if Peacekeeper will be able to continue his operations in Tarkov long enough to expose these secrets, and when that happens, I'll be here to tell the tale. As isolated and lonely as Tarkov may seem, one thing you've learned about the various big players in the region is just how well connected they are. Even some of the more unassuming dealers you perform jobs for, such as therapists, have business dealings and acquaintances in nearly every corner of the region. But some do prefer to work alone. Sergei Arsenyevich Samoilov is one of these people. He prefers to be referred to as simply mechanic, and rather than surround himself with gangsters or foreign diplomats, the mechanic is perfectly comfortable to spend the majority of his time in his small hideout within the chemical factory, surrounded by his tools and computers. But just because he is alone doesn't mean he is lonely. Mechanic keeps himself up to date on the latest news and happenings around Tarkov and the world via the internet and the numerous surveillance systems he has meticulously handcrafted. Mechanic's video and audio surveillance systems are fed directly into neural networks that include facial recognition, scanning each and every PMC and scav that ventures out into the open, and creating a database that can track their every movement. And it's no surprise that Mechanic has designed these systems and keeps to himself. His lone wolf tendencies and nearly agoraphobic lifestyle has an explanation. Mechanic absolutely detests modern society. And as your relationship with him grows, and you listen to his philosophical ramblings, you may learn a thing or two about Tarkov. And you may learn something about yourself. Tap, tap, tap. The steady rhythm of rain droplets are the metronome of nature, as big fat droplets fall from the brush above you and splash onto the barrel of your AK-74. You've been sitting in the mud, concealed by the bushes around you for 3, maybe 4 hours now. You're not really sure anymore. The misery of being cold and wet has faded somewhat, as fatigue and sleeplessness has crept its way into your consciousness. Your eyelids begin to become heavy as your mind wanders and recreations of the last week's events unfold in your head. Just a week ago, you were loading onto a helicopter with your unit, deploying from St. Petersburg to investigate some kind of incident in the Norvinsk Special Economic Zone. Everyone was there. Boris, Ivanovich, Dmitri, Mikhail. For some reason, you all thought you'd be fast roping into the Terra Group headquarters, maybe have some kind of legendary gun battle, then be picked up and be on your way back home within a day, maybe 2 tops. This job was going to pay so well, you were all going to retire and live out the rest of your days just drinking and fishing. Hell, you'd all been in the military for so long before joining Bear that all of us were just ready to hang up our rifles and helmets and just be normal people for once. Then, your memories turned darker, and a bloody scene of Dimitri's head snapping back while on your first patrol, shot in the face, dead instantly. The next day, Mikhail sacrificed himself by diving on top of a grenade thrown by some USEC piece of shit. They're all gone now. It's only you. A friendly scav, and by friendly, you mean he didn't shoot you on sight, told you about a guy named Prapor, and now you're sitting here in the mud, trying to kill the locals that have gone mad, just to prove yourself to them. A sudden shot of adrenaline pulls you out of your waking nightmares as you finally spot movement near the shallow end of the river. A lone scav is attempting to make a crossing, but whatever he's managed to find in his backpack has him moving slow. This won't be too difficult, you think to yourself, and you gently place the stock of your Kalashnikov on your shoulder. Carefully aiming, you pull the trigger and take the shot. Fuck! You rip the charging handle to the rear and eject the dud round and seat a fresh one into the chamber. Again. Shit, my gun is fucked. You mutter and rip the dust cover off to inspect the guts of your rifle. There it is. Your hammer spring is broken in one spot. You replace the dust cover and pull your Glock pistol. It's the only weapon you have left. You'll need to get this fixed, and soon, or you'll be seeing your squad mates sooner rather than later. Back at Prapor's makeshift shop, you show him your busted rifle and ask about parts. He doesn't have any he's willing to give you, and he sure as hell isn't going to give you a brand new rifle. But just as you're about to leave, he calls you back and tells you to head to the old chemical plant, and there you'll find a man known as Mechanic, who'll be able to fix your weapon. Finding Mechanic wasn't too difficult, and I guess you could say that he found you first. Luckily enough, you decided to visit the factory when things were relatively quiet. Just yesterday, you heard enough gunfire coming out of this place that you were expecting a bullet between the eyes as soon as you walked in the place. But today, it's eerily silent. While walking past some old service doors that looked locked and welded shut, a tinny electronic voice erupted from a small concealed speaker on the wall. "PMC, stop right there. Prapor had one of his message boys call ahead. Holster your weapon and stand where you are. I can help you, but I don't want any funny business, okay?" You notice the small red light emanating from a camera and realize he can see you. You nod, and the sound of about a dozen heavy locks clicking and clacking open comes from the rusted metal door in front of you. Standing in front of you is a man of average height and slender build, wearing a flannel button-up shirt stained with oil residue and singed in spots from small electrical arcs. He wears dark-rimmed spectacles and possesses a stern yet unthreatening face. He stands at the edge of darkness, but you can spot hundreds of small indicator lights blinking behind him and hear the whirring of electronics and the clicking of servos behind him. He motions you in, and before he can turn on any lights, you immediately notice the change in temperature. It's a solid 15 degrees hotter in here than out on the factory floor. Fluorescent lights wink on, and you take in your surroundings. To your left is a simple but sturdy workbench and a half-disassembled assault rifle that you don't recognize. It's definitely a newer model, and definitely Western in origin. Along the left wall are racks upon racks of firearms in various states of assembly and repair, and neatly organized bins of parts, pins, and springs. The majority of the room is dominated by server racks, computers, and fiber optic cables. They're all neatly bundled together, labeled, and color-coded. Along the far wall is what seems like some kind of command center, with multiple high-resolution computer monitors displaying full-color surveillance images and what appears to be dozens of different locations you don't recognize, with some of the cameras displaying small digital boxes framed around the faces of individuals carrying rifles, tracking their faces as they move. 2 additional monitors have some kind of computer code displayed, and one is on a web page you can't make out from this distance. Mechanic glances at you with an arched eyebrow, and calmly walks over to the computer displays and turns them all off with a single press of a button. "I hear you have a broken rifle," he says, turning back to you. You unsling your rifle and check that the safety is still engaged, then toss the rifle to Mechanic. Catching the rifle, Mechanic swiftly disengages the safety, and your heart skips a beat as you realize you've been double-crossed. Mechanic then racks the bolt and ejects the round in the chamber, catching it in his hand. Noticing that you've reached for your pistol, he gives you a knowing smile, and he inspects the cartridge primer. "Very light primer strike. The hammer isn't hitting with enough force. Probably your hammer spring. I have 1,000,000 of them, no big deal. And yes, I am Mechanic. I have a lot of work to do, so after this is done, are you willing to help? It's a shame there's so little time and that the programmer unit for the PLC 100 is out of order. And all these orders to boot. Whatever, why am I telling you this? I need you to assemble an MP-133, I won't have time for it. And I'm missing some parts too. This gun should have more than 47 ergonomics, laser designator. With a freshly repaired rifle back in your possession, you head back to your hideout, taking back roads and detours to avoid any trouble so that you have time to think. Who is this Mechanic guy? What are all those machines and computers? And he seems to take orders for specific guns from someone. You try to piece it together, but eventually abandon the idea and think of how you'll put this gun together for him. You arrive at the hideout, and after rummaging around through the spare junk you've managed to accumulate in the last few days, you're surprised to find that you can actually put together the gun the Mechanic wants. The MP-133 you found on a dead scav is rusted in spots, but it seems to work all right, and you hope that it will meet his expectations. Returning to Mechanic's shop the next day, you see him hunched over some delicate-looking circuit boards with a soldering iron. He glances at the shotgun, then nods towards the other side of the room. "You got it? Leave it in the corner." Then he kicks a cardboard box by his feet towards you and resumes his work. Looking inside, it contains a bundle of rubles and a Glock 17 with a 50-round ammo pack. The Glock appears to be brand new, and still has the copper-colored anti-seizing compound on the slide rails. You're not sure where or when Mechanic got this, but you accept the payment. He finishes with whatever he was working on, and moves over towards a computer monitor near you that is displaying some kind of graph. showing the rise and fall of something you don't understand. You've not failed with the shotgun, so you may know your way around the tools. That didn't save me much time, though. All exchanges are on fire. Hope it won't start a panic. Nevertheless, the plan remains the same. I don't think it'll last long. Okay, I need you to work. And you, try to get hold of an AKS-74U. I need it with a B11 handguard, 60-rounder, and compact. Make sure it's light. Yes, indexes have nothing to do with this. Hope you remembered everything. See you soon. This guy shares a way of making conversation, you think to yourself. Indexes? Like the stock market? You aren't really sure what he was rambling about in between your instructions, but he seems to be paying pretty well for these builds, so you head out and begin looking for the parts he needs. Lucky for you, it didn't take long to source all the parts that fit Mechanic's description, and even though you almost resorted to taking an angle grinder to the handguard retainer cap, you got all the parts installed and brought it back to Mechanic's shop. Satisfied with your work, he hands you a big bundle of cash and produces a cigarette from his breast pocket and sticks it in his mouth, lighting it with a Zippo lighter before flicking it closed and speaking through smoke-filled lungs. When I was a child, people used to say that it's not the destination that matters, but the journey itself. He pauses, letting the words linger in the air like his cigarette smoke, before continuing. But what if the destination is yourself? What do you know? How you use your reflexes? How many bullets are in your magazine? This feels particularly true when you're supposed to survive, clinging to this world with your teeth. He trails off. While he was speaking, he wasn't looking at anything in particular, and now his gaze seems unfocused and distant, as if he's recalling something profound. He seems to snap out of it, and looks you in the eye and says sharply, I need an MP5, 50-round mag, silencer, tactical flashlight. He pauses, then fixes you with a cool stare. And decide for yourself what's more important to you, the journey or the destination. You nod and leave the factory wondering what the meaning of his philosophical tone was. Is this some kind of metaphor or test? Is he going to ask me about this later? You have no idea, but you trudge off into the night to collect the parts he needs. Returning once again with a completed build, Mechanic simply mutters an acknowledgement of how the gun is quiet and effective, then hands you another bundle of cash. This time, it's euros. You stand there for a moment, expecting another order for a very specific gun, but this time, Mechanic sits there in his chair and eyes you up and down, like he's sizing you up and trying to decide if he wants to speak his mind or not. Eventually he does speak and says, Yesterday, someone was banging at the closed door in the kitchen. Sounds weird, right? I absolutely understand that this is impossible. There's some sort of rational fear inside me, like a child when you're afraid of monsters under the bed. I think these fears grow stronger the farther away you are from civilization. When you're among others, as part of a society, even if you find a monster under the bed, you can tell someone about it. When you're alone in the dark every day, it doesn't work that way. He pauses, grabs another cigarette, lights it. He's always smoking. After a moment of silence, he continues. I'll tell you what it was the next time, since the irregularities don't stop there. For example, someone's jamming my signal, presumably from the shoreline territory. It's a hard trick to pull without powerful antennas. Try to look for satellite dishes. Most likely they use something that looks similar. There should be at least two, about 450 meters away from each other. You just want me to find the antennas, you ask? He simply nods and resumes sanding what appears to be a bedding job on a Remington 700 chassis. As it turns out, the journey to Shoreline was more dangerous and time-consuming than the actual task Mechanic gave you. The satellite dishes were easy to find, and although you didn't really understand the implications of doing this job, Mechanic has been paying very well for relatively simple tasks. Returning to Mechanic, you give him the coordinates of the antennas, and after muttering about why someone would want to do something or other, he smirks and looks up at you from his chair. I promised to tell you about the monster. You look at him, confused. For the first time, he cracks a smile and shows his large, perfectly straight but nicotine-stained teeth. My story from the other day. Remembering, you nod and he continues. It was a failed controller. It flipped out and seemed as if someone was knocking at the door. Jesus Christ, you think to yourself. This hermit might be spending a little too much time alone. He continues, "That's how we create fears for ourselves. Interestingly, if I didn't go and check what it was, it would be turned off in 15 minutes by the shutdown relay. After that, it would be extremely difficult to determine the source of the night sound. That's how all those stories from the newspapers are born, I assume." He coughs, swallows, then pauses for a moment before continuing. "I can bypass the signal jammers by reconfiguring their frequency without arousing suspicion of their owner, as if things are still the same as they were. I need a bit of electronics for this. I think you can help me. The materials must be found silently so no one would know what we're working on." He reaches into his breast pocket, and instead of producing a cigarette, he withdraws a small piece of paper, folded up into a small square between his index and middle finger, and holds it out to you. You reach for it, and notice his thumb is sticking out, kind of like a finger gun. You pause for the briefest of seconds before grabbing the paper and unfolding it to reveal a list of computer parts. You quickly calculate the quickest routes to the Ultra shopping mall in your head, knowing there will probably be some of these PC parts laying around there. Walking through the woods by yourself, you wonder if the finger gun gesture was intentional or just a coincidence. As your mind wanders, you start to ponder the almost comical, metaphorical nature of it before catching yourself. Oh God, I must be spending too much time around that guy with all those philosophical monologues. Now here I am, trudging through the woods, the philosopher of Tarkov. After some time carefully navigating the outskirts of the customs area, you stand on the overpass that offers a good view of the Ultra shopping mall. You never visited Tarkov before its descent into madness, but you vaguely remember seeing advertisements for this place on the television. The overcast skies, broken windows, and derelict vehicles in the parking lot is a far cry from the colorful and sunny advertisements that came with a cheerful jingle, politely asking you if you'd like to stop by for a fun day of shopping with the family. There's most likely some electronics stores in there, and if that fails, there's probably plenty of computers and various offices around the place that might not be completely ransacked by now. You cautiously make your way inside. Turns out that your intuition was correct, and while avoiding some loud and very drunk scavs sitting around a burn barrel, you quickly found a back office in an old furniture store that had just what you needed. You return the items to Mechanic, who mumbles an acknowledgement for your efforts while tossing you a bundle of cash, then head out. The following day, you return to Mechanic. On the way there, you realize that of all the scum in Tarkov willing to give you work, you find his company the most welcoming. He isn't trying to actively kill you by sending you out into combat on a daily basis, and his philosophical nature at times can be endearing. You wonder that maybe when all this is over, maybe you and he could go get a drink someday. That same line of thought trails off as you think of the odds of you ever actually escaping. How many bodies have you seen in your short time here? How many of those bodies were because you pulled the trigger? Nobody really lasts long here. What makes you think that you'll actually make it out? The thought is interrupted by the realization that you're standing in front of Mechanic's shop. The door is open, and he is standing in front of you. He motions you in. Mechanic studies you for a moment, then says, "Someday, we will get rid of the invisible hand, which used to brand us with employee badges and now caused this mess." He flips through a few papers in his hands that have all kinds of writing and something that looks like a map or a layout of an area. He continues, "And I think it will lead us to a great war. At least, all current events look like preconditions to it." He glances up at you, sees the confused but interested look on your face, decides to get straight to the point. "I worked here, at the chemical plant, as an ordinary foreman." There it is. You're finally starting to understand who this man is. He continues, "It was a good time. Everyone thought so, including me." He pauses for a second with the faintest hint of a smile on his face before turning grim. "Now it's full of scavs and swarming with brigands and outlaws. I want to make use of the factory premises. I need you to find out which exits can still be used." Finally finding the schematic he was searching for, he tosses over what looks like to be a map of the factory, with the 3 doors circled in red. You nod, pick up your rifle, and head out the door. Mechanic's shop is one of the most easily accessible but yet hidden areas in the factory. You can visit him with relative ease, but actually exploring deeper into the factory itself is not for the faint of heart. Recently, Bear operatives have been closing in on whatever remaining USEC that are positioned here, as the most recent intelligence indicates that there may be an access point to a secret Terra Group laboratory somewhere inside the factory. In addition to that, like Mechanic indicated, the place seems to be teeming with armed locals that will shoot any PMC on sight. You can't simply walk around the place and go sightseeing, but you feel confident you can get this job done in a timely manner. The main entrance and exit is easy. That's where you'll start. Gate 3 by the looks of it on the map the Mechanic provided you. Checking it off your list, you carefully poke your head out and observe the main factory floor. The place is dark and you can hear shuffling and murmuring of scavs as they attempt to overturn some piece of equipment at the edge of the light's reach, far off to your right. Looking at your map, you need to head straight and left down a tight corridor to the next exit. Shouldering your AK at a low ready, you carefully and quietly head towards the hallway in front of you. After not even 4 steps forward, you step on a flat piece of sheet metal that almost causes you to lose your balance, and in the process, the piece of metal is flung out from your foot and loudly crashes into a large piece of machinery. Looking to your right, you spot the heads of scavs snap over to your direction and shout in alarm, dropping whatever they were trying to overturn and grabbing shotguns and pistols from their backs and waistbands. The quickest one to bear arms with a pistol lets off a flurry of shots in your direction. They go whizzing above your head. Reacting as you've been trained, you let off a burst of 5 rounds in automatic fire to suppress them as you dash towards the corridor in front of you. You hear footfalls approaching from behind as 3 scavs are in hot pursuit. The corridor is extremely dark with a single red blinking light serving as the only illumination in the area. There is almost no cover, and you decide to try to beat them to the other end. Halfway down the hallway, your heart sinks as you hear them enter the hallway behind you, shooting wildly. Glass panes to your right explode as bullets meant for you shatter them with their impact. You're almost to the end of the hallway when a searing white-hot pain erupts from your right forearm. You glance down to see gouts of blood spurting from a gaping wound just above your elbow.
Fuck! Not like this!
You mutter to yourself, attempting to bring your rifle up to fire, but your fingers no longer respond to your commands. Transitioning your rifle to your other shoulder, you empty your magazine down the hallway. The thunderous report of your rifle reverberating off the walls of the corridor, and the screams of the scavs on the other end fueling your bloodlust and giving you the fuel you needed to stay in the fight. You slide around the corner and kick the magazine release and the empty mag out with it, and seat a fresh magazine. The corridor is now silent. Pain and the feeling of wetness reminds you of your wound, and you tear open your IFAK mounted to your plate carrier, spilling its contents on the floor and finding the cat tourniquet. Wrapping it just above the elbow, you crank the windlass unbearably tight until the spurting blood turns into a tiny trickle. Your heart drops into your stomach as you now hear more voices at the end of the corridor, attracted by all the commotion. But it's not scavs, it's English. Your blood turns to ice as you realize that a squad of USEC has come to investigate. Rage consumes every part of your being as you realize that this is how your story will end. You'll be some bloodied and bullet-riddled corpse left to rot on some dying factory in the middle of nowhere. Shouts and automatic gunfire erupt from the end of the hall, but not in your direction. Cautiously peeking around the corner, you see muzzle flashes as the USEC have turned their attention to something else. They're shouting wildly and firing in a panic, and you can hear one.
How the fuck does he move so fast?
You hear something huge impact soft flesh, and you could swear that even at this distance, you can hear the wind being completely knocked out of someone.
I'm empty. Reloading. Reload!
A loud and wet, grotesque smack reverberates off the walls of the corridor. You retreat even further, only peeking enough so that one eyeball can witness whatever the hell is going on at the end of the hallway. A figure straight out of a nightmare turns the corner and begins to walk in your direction. It's a man, you think. Slim but covered head to toe in corded, sweating, and tattooed muscle. His arms are flecked with gore, and he drags a massive sledgehammer on the ground behind him, and his face is hidden by what looks like a welding mask. Barely able to restrain a gasp, you've seen enough, and quietly retreat to an access stairwell that leads to an underground service tunnel. With the adrenaline of combat fading, and slowly being replaced by the terror of being discovered by the sledgehammer-wielding abomination. The pain in your arm begins to amplify, and you nearly let out a whimper the moment you hear the heavy hammer come to a rest on the concrete floor above you. You stay absolutely silent as you hear the labored breathing above you, muffled by the mask he wears. After what seems like an eternity, you hear the scrape of the hammer being hoisted up once again, and the masked madman slowly walks off, headed to another part of the factory. Long after the sound of the footsteps were no longer audible, you let out a shuddering sigh of relief and realize that you've been holding your breath for some time. Gasping in air, you're relieved to find that the hiding place you chose just so happened to be another exit out of the factory. This one marked cellars. You quickly check the lock on the door and find that it's in working condition and not blocked, then slowly make your way towards Gate 0, the final exit. Some days later, after a rough and extremely painful surgery performed by the therapist, you're ready to head out again. You stop by Mechanic's shop to tell him the news, that all exits are good to go. You give Mechanic back his map, stained with your blood now, and he glances at your bandaged arm.
Good old factory sure has changed,
he remarks, then takes a long drag off his cigarette. He turns around, rummaging through a box behind him. Part of you wishes that he cared more about your injury, but crying over spilled blood in Tarkov is just how things are done around here. He turns around with a wad of cash in one hand and a pretty high-end computer part in the other. You vaguely remember one of your younger cousins showing you one of these a long time ago. It's a graphics card, like for computer games. But what the hell are you going to do with this? Mechanic sees your confusion and frustration, and after letting out a large plume of smoke, begins to speak.
The other day, someone has decided to crash the market by unloading a thick wad of bitcoins. So thick that TargoX started accepting bids 10 times cheaper than the market value.
He paces towards his rack of computer and server hardware.
Bids queue kept going while being constantly replenished with cheaper bids. I managed to buy a couple hundred by chance, and today the price is back to normal as if nothing had ever happened.
He looks at you seriously.
We need to get into that action while the market is being controlled like this.
Still confused, you have many questions about what the hell all this means. Mechanic sits you down and explains to you that all of the computer gadgetry around him is the beginnings of a Bitcoin farm, and that those farms can generate a form of free currency that is largely unregulated, and that if you help him, he can provide the knowledge and some parts so that you can start a Bitcoin farm of yourself. Not only that, but if you can find items of interest for him, he can also supply you with raw Bitcoin, knowing that even within Tarkov, where you seem so far away from any semblance of normal society, money can still buy you almost anything. And the more of it you have, the better chances of your survival and eventual escape. So you agree. Over time, you aid Mechanic in fixing up the factory so that he has adequate power and cooling for his farm. On one occasion, you had to traverse a rather hostile area of the customs zone to retrieve a large package of graphics cards that were seized when violence erupted. Each time you fulfilled one of his requests, he typically paid you in Bitcoin or provided some kind of other helpful aid. And as promised, eventually, you got a small Bitcoin farm of your own operating out of your hideout. Mechanic always was reclusive, but as you continued to help him build up his various computer networks, he stopped leaving his workshop and refused to meet with anyone besides you. On one occasion, he even requested that you begin bringing him his beloved cigarettes. And on one trip to drop off electronics, food, and water for him, he stopped you before leaving and said,
I have 2 neural networks, you know.
Pausing for a moment to allow you to consider what he meant.
One recognizes the faces in the cameras that I have installed around Tarkov and scans them against the databases. And the other monitors the cryptocurrency trading and reacts to it.
You notice for the first time that he almost never looks at you in the eye when talking anymore.
Today, I decided to create one more. It will monitor the temperature, humidity, pressure, and other parameters of my hideout, amongst other things, and respond to my mood.
You consider this for a minute. Neural networks are supposed to be some kind of self-learning AI system, but it sounds like he's trying to make some kind of a digital companion.
I called her Lucia. The neural network, I mean. So when I keep silent, it does well and even reminds me to get some sleep when necessary. But as soon as I start talking to myself, it attempts to distract me, putting on music or something like that.
You listen silently, intrigued by this new side of Mechanic that he's never revealed before. He continues.
However, I trained her with phrases from movies. At the time, it seemed like this was appropriate, but not for me. I'll have to think about what stimuli are the best to mimic real people, rather than society and its stereotypes.
For the first time, Mechanic looks forlorn and his eyes look weary. He trails off. You're not sure what to say or do, but before you leave, he gives you another gun build order, and this time, before leaving, you rest a hand on his shoulder and give him a slight smile. He seems momentarily taken aback by the gesture at first, but returns a grin, and you once again part ways. During this time, you also continued to help Mechanic build his custom order guns. Each time you visited, Mechanic would typically begin with a philosophical monologue of some kind that over time, you came to expect and enjoy. His cynical but thoughtful outlook on the world and societies of modern nations were like an oasis of sanity in a part of the world that had devolved so much. The more time you spent around him, the more thoughtful you became yourself. And one night, laying in your hideout, you began to wonder, you've spent so much time here and done so much killing. Each one of those scavs or PMCs that you've had to drop may have at one point have been a family man or a good guy. They had dreams, aspirations, and goals. You feel confident that you'll eventually leave this place, but like Mechanic pointed out so many times, and even though you may leave this place and go off and try to be normal somewhere, anywhere in the world, after all that has happened here, and after all of the death and destruction you have caused, you may be able to leave, but will you ever truly escape from Tarkov?